Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. Grand Cathay is finally here in the old world, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on some of the models. I wanted to paint mine similar to the box art, but I made a few changes to the color scheme to make it my own. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly, and we'll talk about how I designed the color scheme. We'll cover the basics and paint the models to a battle-ready quality. In the second half, we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. I think it will be easier to paint these models in a sub-assembly. I like to drill a hole with a pin vise and then insert a paper clip with a small amount of super glue. Then I'll just push the paper clip into a cork. For models that are on bases, I attach those with a little bit of super glue. You could use poster tack or double-sided tape instead if you like. After assembling the models, I undercoated them with a bright white primer. I thought a lot about how I wanted to design my color scheme. I like some aspects of the box art, especially the jade green color, but I think some parts of the studio color scheme could use improvement. The first thing that sticks out to me is the banner looks out of place. The white and black combination is visually striking, but those colors don't appear anywhere else on the rest of the unit. The green, red, and brown colors feel like they're competing for attention. Each color occupies about the same amount of space, and each color is the same value. If we make the photo black and white, it becomes more obvious. Each of those colors is the same shade of gray. My solution is to make a few subtle changes that should hopefully have a big impact. The models need an obvious main color, and I'd like to go with a jade green. In order to help push the green theme, I'm going to eliminate the red entirely and replace it with two new colors, a pale jade green and a light value orange accent color. The pale jade will offset the darks and midtones, and the orange will serve the role of a complementary accent. It will make the green look greener without competing for attention. Now that I had a plan in mind, I began by painting the skin with a mix of equal parts Darkoath flesh and skeleton horde. For a variety of skin tone recipes with contrast paints, check out my human skin tutorial here. I wanted a darker tone on this other model, so I painted a second layer. I painted all the steel areas next with Iron Hand steel. Do your best to keep this layer as neat as possible on the arms where it meets up against the cloth sleeves. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for an even finish. Since I'm incorporating a lot of jade into the color scheme, Croak Green has a really nice pale jade tone, and I'd like to use that. I painted a layer on some of the cloth and over the steel armor. I'd like the sword to have a different tone, so I didn't apply any green shade on that. If you made any mistakes with silver on the white cloth, make sure to touch that up before painting the shade. Once the Croak Green shade dried, I painted a layer of Nuln Oil on the armor and the sword. You could paint a second layer if you want deeper shadows. I was happy with how just one layer looks, so I stopped there. Next I highlighted the armor with Iron Hand steel. You could paint very controlled layered highlights if you want to, but I decided to dry brush the highlights with a small brush in order to save time. Before I paint anything else on the model, I added a thin black outline around the unpainted sections. This is a technique commonly called blacklining, and it will help add extra definition to the model. It can take some time to do, and you can skip past this step if you want to, but I think the results are worth it. While I had the black Templar on my palette, I also painted the straps on the sleeves and shoulders. Let's paint the trim on the armor next, and a terracotta leather color will complement the green and orange color scheme. I base coated it with Bloodreaver flesh, leaving a thin black outline where it meets up against the other sections. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for an even finish. I shaded the armor trim next with Darkoath flesh. The trim is narrow, so take your time and avoid overloading the brush with too much paint. Next I painted the sash, shield, and plume with Kabalite green. This is a fairly transparent color, and it doesn't cover very well. It'll take a good 2 or 3 layers for a solid finish. I'm not too worried if some of the paint gets on the belt, since I'll be covering that up with opaque paint later. But I do want to be careful where the color meets up against any other areas that are already painted. The green is looking nice and solid now, so next I shaded it with Aeldari Emerald. Contrast paints work really well as shades too, and not just base coats. I like to think of them as a very strong wash. Next I base coated the sword handle and scabbard with Sigvald Burgundy. I was debating on how to paint these, and at first I thought I would go with black or brown to match the other leather on the model, but I think for such a small area it would work out to have another complementary color. The burgundy is looking a little too vibrant for me, so I added a layer of Nuln Oil to dull and darken it. Next I base coated the boots, straps, and pouch with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale, and you can learn how to mix your own set here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin Gray is close. Then I shaded the leather with Black Templar. I think this method looks better than using Black Templar on its own, or a more opaque color like Black Legion. The gray undercoat covers up any spills from the previous layers, and by layering Black Templar over it, it makes a deep black color with a soft, dark gray highlight. Next I painted a few details on the scabbard, sword, and shoulder pads with Runelord brass. Then I painted the string and shield emblem with Wild Rider red. You may need a second layer for a bright finish. Next I shaded both the brass and the Wild Rider red areas with Darkoath flesh. I painted the gems next, beginning with an outline of thinned black paint. Then I base coated the entire gem with white, leaving a black line around the edge. Next I painted a layer of Aeldari Emerald and used the brush to push more of the paint up near the top. Finally, I added a tiny dot of white. At this stage you could assemble and base the model and call it finished, but I'd like to add a few highlights, so let's keep going. I painted the eyes first, and the skin tone video I linked earlier shows that process in more detail. Then I highlighted the skin with Flayed-One flesh. Depending on how light or dark your model got, you may need to add white to lighten it, or you may need to add a brown color like XV88 to darken it. All of these highlights could be painted in any order, and I would encourage you to paint them in whichever order makes the most sense to you. I highlighted the edges of the dark green jade with an equal parts mix of Kabalite green and Sybarite green. On large surfaces like this banner, I painted a few glazes of Kabalite green on its own first for a smoother finish, and then I painted the highlight mix on a few of the edges. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. I highlighted the pale jade next with a mix of Nurgling green and white. If you made any mistakes earlier, it's easy to touch up by adding more Nurgling green to the mix. The exact ratio will vary from model to model, so just keep adjusting the mix until it looks right to you. I highlighted the edges of the armor trim next with Knight-Questor flesh. If you want to highlight it one more time, you could use Cadian flesh tone next. But I'm happy with just one layer, so I'll stop here. Next I highlighted the edges of the orange with Fire Dragon. You may want to paint a second layer for a really bright finish. I picked out the edges of the sword handle and scabbard next with Pink Horror. I think warm highlights would look the best on the black leather, and it would complement the color scheme as well. I highlighted some of the sharpest edges with Stormvermin fur. If you want to highlight one more time, you could use Administratum Gray next. But I'm happy with how this one highlight looks, so I think I'll stop here. I'd like to paint a simple highlight on the bronze, so I thinned some Runelord brass and picked out a few details with a sharp brush. I also lightly dry brushed a couple of the larger bronze parts. I really like the look of turquoise oxidation on bronze and brass, so I think I'll add a little bit to the models. I thinned some Ahriman blue with water, and with barely any paint on the brush, I added a few spots here and there. The paint will look brighter while it's wet, and after it dries, it will look more dull and subdued. I think it's a good idea to paint it sparingly, and slowly build up a couple layers until you're happy with the results. I picked out the belt rivets and highlighted the steel next with Stormhost silver. I'm trying to keep the silver highlights sharp and narrow, and avoid overdoing them. The steel armor has a subtle jade tone, and if the silver highlights are too wide or too bright, they'll overpower and detract from the green. Using some decal setting solution, I applied a decal to the banner, and after it dried, I painted a layer of contrast medium over it to reduce the shine. The white design doesn't really fit with the rest of the color scheme, so I painted a layer of croak green over it, and now it'll match the banner trim. I drilled some holes where the parts need to go together, and then clipped the pins down to a shorter length. Always test fit the parts before you glue them, and see if you need to make any adjustments. I like to use a small amount of super glue, and then after putting the parts together, I'll add a drop of accelerator to the joint. Superglue vapors can leave a frosted effect, and I find that the accelerator prevents that from happening. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the top of the base, and then I sprinkled on some coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with a layer of thinned Rhinox hide. Then I dry brushed the sand with Steel Legion drab, and painted the rocks with Stormvermin fur. I'd like to repeat the green and orange theme on the bases, and first I applied a few patches of static grass with superglue. I have some model railroad clump foliage, and I think the dark green will look good, so I added a couple pieces of that as well. This fall colored foliage is pretty neat. I think it's meant for model trees, but I like to cut it up with scissors and then add small pieces to the base with superglue and tweezers. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and now on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. I think harmony is the key ingredient of a successful color scheme. Colors should work together and complement each other. Bold colors play a very important role, but they can be overpowering if they aren't supported by quieter colors like neutral grays and browns. In a way, it's a lot like cooking and balancing flavors. If a chef has a really high quality ingredient and wants it to shine, they think of other ingredients that support it and bring out its best qualities, rather than just throwing a bunch of strong flavors that compete or overpower it. What do you think? Do you have any strategies for designing color schemes? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting!